how crazy. It's like, come on. Like, that's where most pro-life people are at. Why are you shocked that there's pro-lifers that think that life begins with fertilization and trying to pass laws based on that idea? Well, welcome back to Apologist Reacts. It's been a while since I filmed these, so I've been filming some this morning, and this time wanted to take a look at this Bill Maher discussion. It's only 4 minutes long, which will be nice because these React videos are hard to keep short. Like, we've released a 39-minute one recently. It's like the nature of React videos where I need to watch an entire thing and then provide commentary. Like, it's kind of different than reacting to like short clips of like scenes from movies. Anyway, this one's only 4 minutes. I haven't seen this. I am aware that at some point post Supreme Court leak, Bill Maher said something along the lines of that he's been looking more into abortion and seeing a couple of more legitimate points the pro-life people are making than he was aware of before. So I'm aware of that, but I haven't seen this clip and I don't remember the specifics of what he said. So this will be interesting, but at least there's conversation because I think there's at least multiple people here. It's obviously different from a real dialogue because it's on TV, but I'm interested to see how this dialogue goes. Let's take a look and see how maybe everyone could have dialogued better. Maybe if we assume that this wasn't for cameras or something like that. And yeah, let's see what happened.
I'm wondering if this is, what do you think? Is this going to be the galvanizing issue that the left think it's going to be?
You want to start?
Well, first, there are already Republicans talking about outlawing the pill as well. And many of these states will. And even whether they specifically outlaw the pill, it'll still be a crime. We're not going back to 1973. We're going back to 1931 and before. Well, a lot of...
So I'm not aware of legislators or pro-lifers talking about making birth control pills illegal. They certainly would be making abortion pills illegal, and that's a different thing, but that gets conflated. I actually saw, there was a pro-choice person, this was a while back, but they were frustrated with the fact that a lot of times in movies and TV shows, specifically Plan B and like RU46 get conflated. Sometimes Plan B is treated as something that like kills a baby. And of course, at least from the pro-choice perspective, it doesn't. From the pro-life perspective, it really has a lot to do with how you think about the evidence for and against the idea that birth control pills or like these oral contraceptives, the hormones in them can have an effect on the uterine lining and maybe have an abortifacient effect. I am not as convinced as most pro-life people about that. I'll link to some resources in the description if you're interested in at least a counter argument to like the Randy Alcorn view. Randy Alcorn, someone I have a huge amount of respect for, just not currently agreed with him on this topic. But anyway, so I don't know if here is like the same thing happening. Like, is he saying like because he's heard that abortion pills would be illegal, that means that birth control pills would be illegal? Because that's what he's implying, and I'm not aware of anyone doing that. I am concerned about the possibility of this thing happening where like pro-life people, at least like especially like pro-life thought leaders, being on a different page than like GOP legislators, lawmakers, people writing the laws. So like I'm particularly concerned about like, what if someone didn't have a life of the mother exception in an abortion ban or something like that? Like that would be very, very problematic. And maybe they wouldn't know better, but like I want to make sure they do. So I'm in behind the scenes talks with pro-life leaders that are more in that kind of area because we don't deal with politicians hardly ever at this point. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't in the future, but it's just historically speaking, not something we've done. Maybe there's some extreme legislator writing that into a bill. Like I'd have to see evidence, but like I'm not buying it until I see evidence because that's just not where even a lot of pro-life people that are worried about birth control pills having an abortifacient effect don't think that that we should be trying to make birth control pills illegal.
My state of Texas, where I grew up, they have a law that it was not back to the 30s, but Michigan has a law that goes back to the 30s. Texas has one. Automatically, 30 days after Roe versus Wade is repealed, which will happen, it'll come out in June, 30 days, an abortion in Texas is a felony. No exception for rape, no exception for incest, life in prison for the doc.
That's Texas.
In Texas. Well, that's 30.
Yeah, so that's a very important thing that he just said, but it like kind of gets buried for the doctor, for the one doing the abortion, who is clearly more culpable than almost any woman having an abortion. That is certainly where most pro-life people are at when they, as far as the way they think about like what should the teeth of these laws be, is go after the abortion practitioners. I did an interview with the Washington Post recently, and I was asked about whether I was for rape and incest exceptions, and I said I'm not. But the point that I made was, ironically, this is one of multiple times where like pro-life people are kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't, because I have seen pro-choice people in dialogue with pro-lifers who say that they do have a rape and incest exception because like of how badly they feel for the survivor of rape, not because of like a philosophical reason. I know at least one pro-life writer who thinks that there ought to be a rape and incest exception, but for a very narrow philosophical reason. Basically, this person thinks that case is at least pretty comparable to the violinist story that Thompson tells. So like that's a philosophical thing, and you can agree or disagree with that. It's an interesting thought. But like for most people, that's not the reason that they have a rape and incest exception. It's coming out of compassion, okay? And I think pretty much everyone feels compassion for survivors of rape. And generally speaking, when pro-life people are still opposed to a rape and incest exception, they're doing that because they believe that the unborn is a person, regardless of how it was conceived. As much compassion as we need to have for survivors of rape, one reason that rape is wrong is because it's this act of violence on an innocent person. And I also don't think that we should then in turn do another act of violence against another innocent person, which would be the baby. Anyway, I've seen pro-life people who have the rape and incest exception, and then pro-choice people are like, what the heck? I thought you said you think it's a person from conception. Clearly, that's not what's going on with you, because why would it be different, be based on how it was conceived? And like they'll kind of do that thing. And then they will assume that this is evidence of what we've suspected all along, that pro-life people don't actually care about unborn babies. What they care about is punishing women for having sex outside of marriage or something like that. I feel like if all the pro-life movement, if the entire pro-life movement got behind abortion bans with rape and incest exceptions, then pro-choice people would be saying, look, you're super inconsistent. You clearly don't mean what you say. And then if we don't agree with rape and incest exceptions, then we're called, horrible people who don't care about women who are survivors of rape. But I think for a lot of people, they're just looking for any attack they can make on the pro-life side, especially in public, that can, convince people not to support pro-life policies.
30 million people. Michigan has the same law. No exception for rape, no exception for incest.
And we know that most Americans, including conservatives, do not believe that. They're not on that page.
They voted it in Texas not that long ago, and it's because they're not pro-life, Bill. They're pro-life in prison. They want to punish, they want to control, and they're going to be able to now.
Well, okay. Go ahead.
I disagree. I don't think they want to punish and control. Look, I am pro-choice. But here we have a continuum, right? Somebody gets pregnant, and then there's birth. And that whole timeline in between, there should be a portion of that time, as there has been, when an abortion is legal, whether it's medical, the pill, or surgical. There's got to be a...
So C just referred to the pill as she's talking about abortion pills there. That's really interesting. So again, is C talking about the same thing that this guy just was? Or is this an indication that they're both talking about abortion pills, which would, of course, become illegal in the case of an all-out abortion ban? But so far, I am really appreciating what C is saying, because he's not doing this kind of extreme ad hominem on basically the entire pro-life movement. C is he's acknowledging basically where most pro-choice people are at. Most pro-choice people don't think that abortion should be legal through all 9 months. And so, while I won't agree with her final conclusion, C is being, it seems like a lot more charitable, at least the way this is starting. I'm going to go back a little bit.
Abortion is legal, whether it's medical, the pill, or surgical. There's got to be a point at which we say, this is a human being capable of living outside the womb, where maybe we don't do that. I think
so. That's interesting. So, of course, there has to be a point, and most pro-choice people don't think that it should be birth when we say this is a human being, and presumably she's using the term human being to mean person, to mean valuable person with rights that that ought to be recognized, not just biologically human. And I see him kind of agreeing with her, but then she just basically shoved in viability as like, here's the thing, because he talked about it being able to survive. Like, listen to that again.
This is a human being capable of living outside the womb.
There. That is the weirdest pro-choice definition of personhood. He's picked the only moving target. I don't get it. At least in the case of the lawyers who were, like not the pro-life ones who were arguing in the Dobbs case, at least they weren't making this argument. They were arguing that viability ought to be the cutoff just because basically you have to pick a point. And they weren't saying it's because this is when personhood begins. They're just saying like, you've got to have some kind of balance between the women's rights and the baby's rights. And so viability is at least like an objective line. But again, it's the only moving target, and I don't think that we should draw the line arbitrarily. I think we should try really hard to figure out when you have a valuable human being and then base, the rights on that. Where
maybe we don't do that. I think that's what you see a lot of in Europe, and a lot of people are kind of settling around, okay, 15 weeks maybe. Now, I have a good friend, lifelong liberal, who happens to be attached to a children's hospital in St. Louis, Missouri. And he has seen preemies in incubators 5 months along. They are born, they're there struggling to survive, that are now 20-year-olds walking the planet. And he feels this is a lifelong liberal, and he feels very strongly about this, that once that baby is viable, why would you extinguish that life? Now, not everyone's going to. So I really appreciate this. He's making that point because there's an intellectual honesty there. And she's kind of now pointing to maybe why she thinks viability ought to be the point, because it basically just like seems like to her friend who works with sometimes NICU wards where you've got these preemies, like obviously there's going to be this internal kind of contradiction if you are super, super pro-choice, but then you're trying to help these babies survive. And clearly these babies, wouldn't arguably even be legally protected if they were still in the womb, at least for another, month or two. I don't know if that's a terribly philosophical argument for why viability ought to begin then. It just kind of seems like, well, because these preemies exist, that like we should draw the line there. I'm just not convinced that that is a good philosophical argument. I can understand why someone would get there, especially if I'm not thinking about it really carefully, but it's just you're picking a moving target. What do you do if viability becomes 6 weeks because technology has gotten so good and we can transplant, babies into an artificial womb or a surrogate or something like that. And at least some babies are able to survive at 6 weeks when they wouldn't before. Like, what do you do then? Going to agree on this. It's going to require some tough work. There are lots of questions.
Well, you just outlined what Roe v. Wade holds and what the Supreme Court is about to overturn.
But that won't ban abortions. I realize.
Okay, so Roe versus Wade combined with Doe versus Bolton didn't hold that. The way Doe versus Bolton defined health, because they said you can only have abortions in the third trimester for health of the mother reasons, but they defined it very, very widely. It wasn't just physical health. It was also her age and her, like what's going on with her family and things like that. It's basically a huge loophole. And so Casey versus Planned Parenthood drew the line of viability. So he's just incorrect. He's conflating Casey with Roe, which a lot of people do. But just know, like, Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood both get overturned in Dobbs if abortion becomes, like, if abortion goes back to the states, because Casey sort of gutted Roe and replaced it with different reasoning.
There are snapback rules in some states.
States have. Louisiana passed, you mentioned this in your monologue, a state assembly committee in Louisiana passed a bill yesterday, 7-2. It's not a final law yet, that says life begins at fertilization, which means that.
How crazy! Like, come on! Like, that's where most pro-life people are at. Isn't it weirder if a pro-life person thinks that arbitrarily at 8 weeks or something, and they get an injection of personhood from being living human to suddenly being a person now? Like, why are you shocked that there's pro-lifers that think that life begins at fertilization and trying to pass laws based on that idea? And these snapback laws, they're usually referred to as trigger laws. I've never heard them called snapback laws, but whatever. I know what they mean. There's those on both sides. You've got states that have already set it up so that if Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood go away, nothing really changes. That abortions are still, they'll become abortion safe havens. So you're going to have different states, different places, right? So the West Coast is going to be abortion safe haven land. California, Oregon, Washington State, Colorado, probably Illinois, and then like some northeastern states, like pretty obviously, like New York, obviously are going to be abortion safe havens for at least the foreseeable future. And then you're going to have other states that are more conservative, and there's probably going to be some states in between. That is certainly a thing, and that's been a thing for a while, that these trigger laws have been getting passed. But it's not like only pro-lifers are passing them.
IUD is murder. This is what they're voting on in these Republican states. If they had your kind of sensible centrist position, I don't think people should be as upset. But they don't. The second largest state is going to make it a felony with life in prison.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Again, for the abortion practitioner, not for the woman.
It is crazy.
Right? Yeah. And again, just the perspective, most Americans think that's crazy.
I would agree.
I think probably even in Texas. Yes, they got it passed. Well, I mean, we'll see if something like that holds.
We'll see. In November, the Texas legislature is on the ballot, the Michigan legislature. If you all don't want felony life in prison laws, you can vote them out.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, another thing I learned this week that
And you know why you would be able to try to vote them out? Because it wouldn't be a Supreme Court issue anymore. It would be because Roe and Casey have been overturned, that then you could try to have an influence on what your state's laws on abortion are.
I think I maybe knew this, but I forgot it, is that it didn't used to be a partisan issue. Right. At the time Roe versus Wade was passed, it was not a partisan issue. That it became a partisan issue because of the Christian right. They made it a partisan issue. They made it so that it became where the Democrats were for abortion being safe and legal, and Republicans were also when their mistresses got pregnant, of course. That in general.
Well, he was getting to maybe an interesting point. I think it's basically true that it was certainly less of a partisan issue in 73, and eventually it became this very divided Republican Party platform is this thing, and Democratic Party platform is this thing. I think, and certainly leaders of the so-called Christian right, like the Christian kind of moral majority, there were people in that movement that tried to get the Republican Party to be more pro-life. I don't think that's very weird, but certainly it eventually became a very partisan issue. I would like it to be less partisan. I would like to see a lot more pro-life Democrats. There are more and more pro-life Democrats. There aren't very many with like power. There's, I think, one that I know of that has made a really big difference in. There's some case recently or something where having a pro-life Democrat vote made a really big difference. And certainly on the layperson level, there are more. The pro-life movement is increasingly becoming more diverse, and I like that. I want that. I don't want the pro-life movement to all be white Catholics, and it's just not the case. It's a very diverse place now, and I'm glad for that. And it's not like the Christian right was trying to get the Democrat Party to be pro-abortion. Like, we might have communicated about that a lot, but they were not controlling the writing of the party platform. So that was a little weird. All right, well, that was okay. I think that's a kind of a clear case of how different it feels when you've got someone that's kind of in extreme kind of attack mode versus someone that's trying to find some common ground and be willing to point out that there's at least controversy here or whatever. Like, he's still very, very pro-choice. Saying that abortion should not be illegal until 15 weeks, like, that bans very few abortions. And so that's kind of an easy position to stake out. In a similar way as it's an easy position, at least in the past, for Republican politicians to say they are completely pro-life, but knowing they wouldn't really have to back that up. And now they're going to have to. And so we're going to see what happens. So this was interesting. It's a good picture of where a lot of the dialogues are going to be going. And pro-life people need to be ready to have those conversations. So I encourage you to get the Equip for Life course. I know I kind of always talk about it at the end of these videos, but I mean, if you're watching a YouTube video this long, then, obviously also, by the way, like, subscribe, comment, like all those things. But also, if you want to get equipped to have the conversations that we are finding to be the most persuasive, we have an online course. A coupon code will be on the screen. You go to equippedcourse.com and you get a permanent membership to that. And just so many people have told us that it's been so helpful to them. And I hope it will be helpful to you. So having said all that, go have a good conversation.